So after a stakeout of almost 7 years, the dedication and perseverance of the British police was finally rewarded today as they swooped in to arrest the dastardly and dangerous criminal Julian Assange in an audacious raid on the Ecuadorian embassy. Our courageous and steadfast boys in blue were not to be denied their man, despite the dangers, and valiantly waited outside the embassy with an impressive display of not one, but 2 paddy wagons, as Assange was handed to them, as arranged and notified beforehand by the embassy staff. We can now all sleep more soundly in our beds, knowing that this despicable enemy of the United States will finally face the justice he deserves. Well, some of us can sleep more soundly in our beds. Actually, scratch that. Some of them can sleep more soundly in their beds, to be more precise. Since it's not us, the great unwashed, the common citizenry, that will be cheering Assange's arrest, it's them. I'm never particularly specific, you'll have noticed, about who they actually are. There's a reason for that, because I don't know who they are precisely. But Assange knew, and he had the documentation to prove it, after he and his organisation WikiLeaks had hacked into several of the US government's secret servers and told the world about what they would rather you and I didn't know. And they're not very happy with him. However, he has already spilled the beans. I haven't followed WikiLeaks very closely in the intervening years, but my impression is that nothing they ever do will ever match up to the things already released. So what's the problem? He's probably already done his worst. The security breaches that he and Bradley Manning exposed will likely have been shored up, so there's little likelihood they will be caught out again, at least in the same way. So what's the problem? Well, as Assange's friend Vaughan Smith has pointed out, the Russian government poisons those it doesn't like in order to send a very clear message to anyone thinking of crossing Vladimir Putin. The US administration, on the other hand, whilst attempting to live up to their reputation as a government of a country that operates under the rule of law, instead bullies their allies, and here I'm of course referring to Sweden, rather than my own glorious British government, who require no bullying whatsoever to grant the US whatever it wants, into concocting trumped-up charges of sexual abuse in order to present a fig leaf of legality with which to pursue their aims. And what are their aims? Justice? That's the fig leaf. The real aim is revenge, of course, and to send an only slightly more sophisticated message than Putin's murderous goons did in Salisbury last year. And that message is, do not fuck with us, or we will bury you. The Russians meant it literally. The Americans, however, are also explicit in their message, which is crystal clear to anyone who cares to listen. And this leads us down a fairly dark path. Even if the US government's actions were justified, which they are in a very narrow way, what is the purpose of the justice system? Is it to take revenge? Not really. It's there to achieve justice. The clue's in the name. When we hear of some vicious and callous murderer getting what he deserves, there is an element of satisfaction to be had from that. But that's a bonus. That's not its purpose. Punishment is a necessary part of the machinery of justice, but justice itself is its own reward. And this case is troubling, because although Assange probably is guilty of illegally hacking the US government and should perhaps be punished in a proportionate way for that specific offence, it seems clear that his intention was not espionage, as US government lawyers will probably argue, but the common good. Now, the common good is an elastic concept at the best of times and is open to interpretation. But the American lawyers will try to argue that Assange sought merely to damage the United States by revealing secrets harmful to national security, which is the trump card to all governments everywhere seeking to silence someone. They will also believe, or they probably won't argue this, is that the US is on the side of good, and so anything that opposes the US is, by definition, opposing good. They're the good guys, so anything they do, no matter how bad, is nevertheless on the side of good. US government good, WikiLeaks, including Assange, bad. This is, of course, utter nonsense. The United States is, I believe, certainly one of the good guys, perhaps the best, but its government is populated with individuals that are no better or worse than anywhere else. There are dutiful, conscientious individuals who do their best and abide by noble principles, but there are also very powerful people with nefarious intentions and vested interests with a lot to lose, who will subvert any and all principles, no matter how noble, in order to get what they want. And the actions of people like Julian Assange, not to mention whistleblowers Edward Snowden, Russ Tice, Bill Binney, Tom Drake and others, seriously threaten those powerful individuals. But not all dissidents are equal. The aforementioned Edward Snowden is, in many people's opinions, including mine, beyond reproach. Snowden was, unlike the Australian Assange, a true American patriot, who at 26 years old sacrificed his freedom, his home and a glittering career ahead of him to reveal that the NSA was breaking the US Constitution hundreds of millions of times a day by illegally listening into the communications of millions of innocent Americans. As a man of principle, he is hard to fault. He went to great lengths, at considerable risk to himself, to meticulously sift through all the data at his fingertips to ensure that nothing he made public could materially damage his beloved country, even as his revelations forced the American people to judge what was being done in their name. Much of the same can be said of Bill Binney, and if you are not aware of him, I would encourage you to look him up. There can be few finer Americans than he. But Assange, not so much. For a start, he's an Australian, although it should work in his favour if the US attempts to try him for treason, since one can only betray one's own country. But by all accounts, it seems that he is far from what one would call a nice bloke. Even Christopher Hitchens, that arch defender of freedoms and scourge of authoritarians, thought him a vainglorious megalomaniac. But great men are seldom nice, or even good men for that matter. But it is often the self-obsessed that can do the things mere mortals cannot. It is often those that really do not care what people think of them that are able to do the things we can't, or won't. The loving family man will not often sacrifice himself for the greater good, because to him, the greater good is to provide for his family. The Assanges of this world are not like the rest of us, but their apartness, their aloofness, their arrogance is necessary and is a gift to the rest of us. They go where we fear to tread. But they are not invincible. They are flawed and they have their limits, and it seems as if Assange, after 7 years cooped up in a London embassy, had reached his. The valiant Ecuadorians, having almost certainly resisted overwhelming American as well as British pressure to give him up, had finally reached the limits of their tolerance of his batshit crazy behaviour and turfed him out. What is a shame is that they released him into the arms of the British police rather than letting him slip away unnoticed. Perhaps they were obliged to do so, diplomatically speaking, but it's a shame nonetheless. But what's a bigger shame is not what will happen to Assange for exposing the truth. It's not even that the US government, egged on by its spooks, will choose to pursue vengeance rather than justice. It's not even that those that Assange exposed will never themselves face justice, let alone revenge. No, the greatest shame is that the central conceit of the surveillance state, that being that the very rationale of surveillance itself is one where the powerful spy on the powerless, will scarcely be questioned. If you have nothing to hide, we are constantly told by those who spy upon us, then you will have nothing to fear. How curious it is that that principle doesn't seem to hold when the cameras are turned on them, isn't it? And so, now what? What's on the cards for Mr. WikiLeaks? Well, if he's lucky, he may well have an ally in the person of Donald J. Trump, whose presidential campaign was helped enormously by WikiLeaks' exposure of Hillary Clinton's 13,000 deleted emails. But I doubt he'll be lucky. I fear that once he disappears into the US deep state with its secret courts and its supermax prisons, we may never hear from him again. And that message will have been delivered loud and clear.